Hey, welcome back to YNR Update. It's Paul. We're going to have a special update today. Today we're going to jump into what could arguably be called one of the biggest super couples in soap opera history. That's Victor and Nikki, also known as Niktor, expertly played by Eric Braeden and Melody Thomas Scott. There's been a lot of debate over actually Victor primarily because he is not only one of the biggest super couples in soap opera history, but he is one of the biggest villains in soap opera. So this is one of those things where you either love the guy or you hate him. And I'm sure we've all been on either side of that fence, but they are a successful couple. You know, it's funny, the couple got together in 1982 and they didn't come from, your typical storybook romance. I mean, Nikki was a prostitute and she was a stripper, and Victor was a business tycoon. And with a little bit of adversity, they ended up getting together. And the couple were actually married in 1984, but Nikki gave birth to their daughter, Victoria, in 1982. So you'd think, happily ever after, but it wasn't so simple. So I guess what I'm going to get into is the not so simple part of Nikki and Victor. Now, the first thing that got in their way is when Victor fell in love with Ashley Abbott. And not only was she pretty much forbidden fruit for Victor for so many reasons, but she was also the sister of his biggest enemy, and that's a lifelong enemy, Jack Abbott. Now, it didn't work out so well for Victor because at the same time he married Ashley, shortly after that, Nikki married Jack. So things got even weirder for the couple, and it looked like they were never going to find their way back to each other. Now, we know that from that marriage, the first affair between the two of them spawned Nicholas. That's right. The pair had an affair, and Nikki ended up having their second child, Nicholas Newman. Now, you might be curious as to how this relationship ended, or both these relationships ended. Well, it actually ended when Victor told Jack that he'd give him back his company that he wrestled away, his father's company, Jabot Cosmetics, if he divorced Nikki. Now, a lot of tragic things happened in this relationship. We were talking about people supposedly dying, people getting shot. Now, at one point, Victor had taken his next wife, and that was Diane Jenkins. It was an architect that he married in 1997, but a year later, Nikki ended up getting shot, and she was close to dying, and Victor ended up divorcing Diane to remarry Nikki on her deathbed, only to find out that the divorce wasn't real and his marriage to Nikki was null and void. But eventually they did find their way back to each other. As I said before, there were a lot of tragedies that got in the way of this relationship, and at one point, after a wrecked car was found with a burnt body inside, it was so burnt that they couldn't tell who it was. Word got back that it was Victor that died, and everyone thought they had died until Victor turned up in Kansas at a farm, and he ended up saving a woman from being raped, and this woman ended up being blind, and the woman was Hope Wilson. And after this rescue, they ended up falling in love and spending some time out in that farm, and she ended up getting pregnant, and she gave birth to Victor's child. But after that, she did not want Victor anywhere near her child, and she ended up raising who we now know as Victor Adam Newman Jr. That's right, Adam. And at one point, Victor was going to leave Hope, and he hoped that he would get back together with Nikki. But it turned out that she was engaged to Brad Carlton at the time. So, I mean, it was always a matter of timing for these guys, and it was always bad timing. But one way or another, they always seem to find their way back to each other. Now, in terms of accidents, Victor's had a ton of them. At one point, he suffered a head injury, and this was, in a way, a serious plot, but it was sort of a comical plot, because after the head injury, it turned Victor into, what I can best call as a simpleton. He wasn't in control of all his faculties for quite some time. And at that point, he ended up making friends with his nemesis, Jack Abbott. And Jack took full advantage of it because Jack wanted to take the company away from Victor. And he was able to manipulate him for a while for his own gain. And until Victor played possum for a while, and then we realized you can get Victor down, but you couldn't count him out, and he came back at Jack with a vengeance. It was one of the major storylines. But once again, Victor and Nikki went through hell. Now, the 2000s didn't fare any better for Victor and Nikki because they went through their own trials and tribulations again. In 2000, Ashley actually gave birth to Victor's child. Now, there was a lot of debate over who the father was, being that Ashley was with Brad and Victor right around the same time. So it ended up being Victor's daughter, and he ended up having his third child. When it looked like there was a chance for them getting back together, at least Nikki thought so, Victor ended up coming back with his new bride, and her name was Sabrina, and she was an art dealer. She also ended up being a friend of his daughter Victoria. And you can call it on the rebound, but Nikki ended up marrying one of the most dangerous villains that's ever, outside of Victor, come on the soap, and that was David Chow. Not to be outdone, after this, Victor married Ashley again. And now, Victor remarried Ashley one more time in the 2000s, but it was short-lived because Nikki and Victor ended up getting reunited after Victor got shot by Paul Williams' deranged sister, Patty Williams. Ended up getting a heart transplant, but ever the survivor, Victor dodged another bullet, so to speak. Now, after that, Victor and Ashley divorced. Now, in recent times, the couple hasn't fared too well either, because at one point, Victor was in search of his son, who he presumed to be dead, and it led him all the way up to Canada, and he ended up finding a barmaid by the name of Maggie, and he brought her back to the Newman Ranch. He brought her back to Genoa City. Now, this proved his own undoing, because Maggie ended up being quite the gold digger. Now, she ended up teaming up with an even more nefarious guy called Deacon Sharp. Now, they ended up spiking Nikki's drinks to turn her back into an alcoholic. Now, Deacon and Maggie ended up setting things up to look like Nikki and Deacon were having an affair, and Victor ended up seeing this. Now, through circumstances, Nikki ended up staying with Deacon, while Victor ended up remarrying Diane Jenkins. Nikki broke up with Deacon after she found out what he and Maggie were up to. Now, this ended up landing Maggie in jail, and things got pretty bad at that point, and Victor and Nikki ended up having an affair. Deacon ended up blackmailing Nikki into marrying him by using the information about Diane's murder. That's right, Diane got knocked off, and Nikki ended up thinking that she had committed the murder, so Deacon used this to his advantage. The other thing that Victor got into that really put the couple in jeopardy was when he brought Chelsea Lawson. That's right, he found a barmaid in a Southeast Asian country and brought her and her mother into town, basically to break up Billy's marriage with Victoria. Victor didn't want any part of this. And when Nikki found out, she ended up leaving Victor. Things got really crazy at that time. It looked like the couple would never be together, because Victor ended up going for a relationship with Sharon. In fact, he ended up marrying her, and Nikki ended up getting back together with Jack again. It was the first time they'd been back together in years, and she ended up marrying him. Victor, down the road, ended up disappearing. In fact, his boat ended up blowing up, and everyone thought that he was dead. Nikki went down to find him. She ended up getting back on the bottle. Turned out that Victor was in LA, and he had amnesia, and he was working as a longshoreman. This was crazy. Sharon, at this point, knew Nikki still had feelings for Victor. She felt like she was spurned, and she ended up trying to get revenge on him. She teamed up with Tucker McCall to try to take away Victor's company, and she did for a while. Victor was found, and he got a lot of help that got him back to Genoa City. Nikki and Victor got back together, and they set out with a plan to take down Tucker and take down Sharon. So part of the animosity you see with Victor and Sharon has to do from that failed marriage and her attempt to take over his beloved company. So, it leads us right up to where we currently are, and they're going through their own hell again. Victor and Nikki are on the opposite side. She's battling the bottle and getting closer to Neil, and we know with Victor there's always a reaction. When he gives up, he turns to someone else. So your guess is as good as mine who he will turn to, but if history hasn't proven anything, that's the way they go, and they end up getting back together. Nikki and Victor are always going to be their own worst enemy. They're always going to wreak havoc with their relationship whenever they can and get back together. But I guess the point I want to make is that they either really belong together or they truly deserve each other. And if nothing else, they keep proving it to us every day on the YNR. Anyways, I want to thank you for checking out this segment. It's Paul, and it's YNR Update. Take care of yourself.